Okay, hello everyone who is tuning in. Welcome to the info session for the online course Thriving in Community with Lee Warren, our instructor who's here with us today to answer questions about the course and for all of you who are thinking about joining so you can find out whether or not this is a good fit for you. And I'm really excited to be here with Lee and spend time together learning about the course. My name is Cynthia. I'm calling in from an eco village in Vermont called Headwaters Community. It's a pretty small community here in central Vermont, and we're having a hot, feels like summer kind of day. So that's why I'm here in actually a little camper that's positioned next to my house that's under construction at the community. So that's what the funny wallpaper behind me is all about. But all right, so before we head over to Lee and have some time for Q&A, I do have a short presentation that I want to run through with all of you. So I'm going to start my screen share here. And once again, if you're just joining, this is the info session, an hour-long info session with Lee Warren, focused on the online course, Thriving in Community, that starts on June 4th. And we'd like to offer you each a discount for joining in on the info session. So if you registered for this event, you will receive an email afterwards with a unique discount code that'll give you 30% off the price of this course, which is $2.99. So 30% off the price of the course, just as our thank you to you for joining today's info session. And way more information about the course, as well as our scholarship application, is available at ic.org/thriving-course. And if you are unsure if you can attend this course due to a financial circumstance, I really encourage you to apply for scholarship. We are committed as an organization to making all of our courses as affordable and as accessible as possible. So yeah, please do take advantage of the scholarship program. And thank you also to everyone who registered for today's event and donated, because all of those proceeds go directly to our scholarship fund. So thank you for that. And a little bit about the structure for this course. So similar to all of our other courses, this one will be 5 weeks long. It'll run from June 4th to July 9th. And each week there will be a 2-hour live class. Classes for this course will take place on Fridays, and the time each week will alternate between noon and 4 p.m. Eastern. In addition to the classes, there's also 2 to 3 bonus sessions, which are part of our normal events program at FIC. So you can join the bonus sessions without signing up for the course. But if you do sign up for the course, you'll also be able to join those bonus sessions. And there's homework assignments in between the classes. We've set up this really cool forum for you all to network. I'm going to share more about that soon. And also dedicated support, both from Lee and from our organization. We really want to help more people find ways that they can join intentional communities and live in them and really thrive in them. So I feel like this course is an important service to all of those people out there who are really new to intentional community culture, and we want to support you on that journey. Here's a peek at the course syllabus. I think we'll come back to this slide later on, and Lee will walk through each of these classes with you. But it is worth mentioning, so all of these classes are recorded. And if you can't attend one or more for any reason, you'll have access to that recording to watch later. And now I'm excited to share about this really sweet learning platform we've set up. So as a course participant, you'll have access to this learning platform both while you're a student and also afterwards. So you can get all the access to your class materials, see the schedule for the course, set up a profile for yourself that you maintain even after the course is done. and you'll have a discussion space to engage with your cohort, as well as afterwards, you can stay engaging with your cohort, plus all of the other alumni who have ever graduated from an FIC course. And right now that's around 215 people. So it's becoming quite a robust network of people who have gone through a similar learning journey together in some topic related to intentional community. All right, so that's all that I have. Now we're gonna open it up to questions. So we are in Zoom webinar mode right now, so you have a few options. We would love if you can ask your question by raising your hand. That's really the most fun because we get to hear additional voices. You can also put your question into the Q&A box, or if you have a more general comment or a question for everyone who's tuning in, you can put that in the chat box. And it is worth mentioning that today we're in Zoom webinar mode, but in all of the classes that Lee will be offering, that's going to be in Zoom meeting mode. So you'll be able to see each other, do breakout groups, do much more interactive kind of things. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And yeah, welcome, Lee.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Oh, yeah, great to have you. I wonder if you could start just by sharing with folks a little bit about yourself for those of you who aren't familiar with your work.
Yes, so my name is Lee Warren, and I live in Western North Carolina, which is the mountainous part of the state. And I live at a place called Earthhaven Eco Village. And Earthhaven has been sort of rural, land-based, on-the-land community since 1994, when the land was purchased by our founders, which was a group of folks, some of whom are still involved. And I joined Earthhaven, I came to Earthhaven in the late 90s and have been there full on for a long time. And now I'm half there and half in Asheville, which is the town that's sort of the center of Western North Carolina. So, and before Earthhaven, I lived in a community there's a whole federation of communities, the egalitarian communities, Twin Oaks and Acorn and East Wind, and I lived at a community called Acorn for a few years. So I've been in community since the mid 90s. So it's been more than half my life, consider it much of my vocation. It's been, the place I've cut my teeth on growing up in every kind of way. So, both on the physical land-based aspect, which I also teach, as well as this whole relational, emotional, social component, which is an ongoing learning experience. So that's a little about me.
Gotcha. Yeah, it's so true. There's this phrase out there, like living in community is the most intense, longest, most expensive personal growth workshop you'll ever take.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I feel like it's so great that you're offering this course. I feel like there isn't quite something out there like this yet. In terms of how you really adjust to living in cooperative culture, which is a new experience for so many people because we didn't grow up, most of us, in eco villages or intentional community.
Yeah, we didn't learn this stuff in school, right? Where did we ever have a sort of inner knowing course about, like, what does it mean when I feel this way or that way, or even just basic emotions or needs, how to communicate basic ideas of what's going on inside of us, let alone how do we navigate conflict with other people? Because in all realms of life, it's not a matter of if conflict, it's a matter of when conflict. So do we have a toolkit to navigate our inner worlds and our outer worlds? And I think for most of us coming into adulthood, we'd say no, not much of a toolkit. And everything that we've had to gather on our own. So this is an ever-growing toolkit for how do we navigate with integrity, with joy, with satisfaction? How do we take a deeper look at some of those systems that can be in place for us to succeed?
Awesome. Great. Well, I'm wondering, Lee, if you can go over more with folks what they can expect when taking the course, and I will return to that slide I had earlier with the different classes, and you can Need to
Yeah,
speak
great.
to that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a journey into the inner, and external personal dynamics that unfold, right? So, depending on the style of community people are living in, it could be urban, it could be rural, it could be suburban. There are hundreds of things we have to navigate in life, like earning a living or raising our children or growing food or finding our profession. But then, on top of that, when we're living collectively, it takes a whole nother level of sophistication and dedication and skill to really navigate. So, you know, it's a pretty comprehensive look at all of those things. Obviously, we're going to be spending 5 weeks together, so it's not decades, but we'll be looking at a lot of these components. And my intention is really, again, to give a toolkit for self, for other, and for community, to clarify some of the social terrain that goes on in most intentional communities. Sort of transparency, a peek behind the scenes to look at the expectations and processes that often happen in community that sometimes people who are new to community don't really know. An invitation for folks to set their own personal goals in these realms, and really ultimately empowerment, right? To navigate how we impact others and how others impact us, and how do we build the muscles to know how to do that with grace. And I would say, what happens when we're thriving. The subject of the course is thriving in community, and I think the ultimate goal really is relational resilience. How do we acquire relational resilience? And I think some of the things that go into relational resilience are a sense of self. Are we self-aware? Do we have self-regard? Are we embarking on self-care? Are we embodied? Do we have a healthy vulnerability? Right? So a sense of self is one of those pieces. And then relationality. Do we have relational confidence, relational awareness? Do we have some skills to navigate and negotiate? Because in adult relationships, it's all about negotiation. And then when we some of those basics, right, a sense of self and a sense of healthy relationality, can we really move towards more and more mutuality? So mutual empathy, mutual empowerment, mutual care, right? That's when things are really humming along. And that's really when healing and transformation can occur, right? Where we can take what we've gotten from our mostly toxic messages from our culture and really start to be in mutual relationship. And then what happens after that is culture change. We look at consent models of relating, we look at partnership models, we look at our relationships as places of nourishment, even when and if they're hard. So that is my overarching goal for the course, is to understand, identify, and build relational resilience. I can go into each of these different of the 5 classes and talk a little bit more in depth. Would that be helpful, Cynthia?
Yeah, maybe just briefly.
Okay.
Briefly for each class. Yeah.
Yeah. So class 1 is the water we swim in. We're exploring the biological and cultural landscapes. So how are we wired? How do our brains work? How do our nervous systems work? How do we learn about emotional regulation, trauma, and windows of tolerance? All really important stuff in community. And then the cultural landscape is, hey, we come from a good amount of, injustice. We have ecological collapse going on. We have capitalism. We haven't had the most nourishing of cultures. So how do those things impact us? And what do we want to create that's other than that? So that's class 1. The second class is community, the joys and the sorrows. So we're going to define a little bit about what different communities can look like. And then what I call the social, emotional, relational hurdles, right? The steep learning curves, hey, I never learned that in school. And what a rock tumbler effect, which is we're constantly impacting each other. And then some helpful attitudes that happen when we come to community, the kind of things that tend to float the ship and sink the ship. And we'll talk about some of the joys and the challenges that can emerge when we're in community. Class 3 is self-care and literacy. This is huge, right? Everything is emerging from the self. So can we look at embodiment practices Can we look at nervous system regulation? And can we look at trusting ourselves? Because when we have a solid core, we can move out from that solid core and manage most anything that happens to us. It's usually when we are not in our full selves that we can feel, overwhelmed, or sort of drowning in the challenges that come up. Class 4 is culture creation and the collective toolkit, right? So what are the kinds of things that create new culture? For me, and maybe for many others, a land-based life is part of that. Multi-generational access, having a shared reality, having sort of a social pressure to work things out with other people, child-centered culture, and then a whole bunch of other things. In our case, we do a really positive death culture, which has been incredible to remake some of our framework about how to think about life. And then some of the toolkit that I and others have used throughout the years: nonviolent communication, ritual and ceremony, Myers-Briggs and Enneagram, relationship contracts, gender circles, talking sticks, process work, all kinds of things that many of us use in community to navigate the transition from where we've been to where we're going to healthy systems. And then after we're together for 4 weeks, I think we can feel safe enough and comfortable enough with each other to dive into sexuality. And how do we build a holistic sexuality, a sex positive and consent-based sexuality, where we look at our needs and other people's needs and the collective. So super juicy stuff, all of it.
Wonderful. So good. Yeah. And I like how you include also at the end this piece around sexuality as well. It makes it feel that much more, rich and exciting. All of it is really interesting territory, from the self to the collective. So glad this is happening. And I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now. I do see that we have a few questions coming in. And folks, if you have additional questions about the course or questions about Lee, feel free to either raise your hand so we can call on you to speak, or to put those in the Q&A box. But Lee, I have one more question for you regarding: who do you feel is an ideal fit for this course? Is it someone who already, does someone need to live in intentional community already? Or who would you say?
Right. I mean, probably every course leader says this, but everyone, gosh, I mean, even if you're not living in community, can we talk about self-care? Can we talk about, the cultural landscape and how to navigate some of that? Again, this is the stuff we haven't been taught. So while we can muddle along in our lives, with or without partners, with or without children, with or without extended families, we're always bumping up against interpersonal challenges. So I'd say, certainly people who are living in community are navigating this stuff all the time. I'm still navigating these stuff, still having big questions about all of these concepts, and look really forward to getting other people's input. And then, anybody who's living collectively or wanting to live collectively, this is more relevant, because what happens when we live collectively is we suddenly have mirrors up all around us, right? Mirrors everywhere of like, oh, wow, that is an interesting reflection of me that I hadn't gotten before, because now I'm living with 12 different people. So it's, we're really in the cauldron in a way. And I see that ultimately as a positive thing if we can be resourced enough to navigate all the intensity of those reflections, be kind to ourselves, and integrate all of our parts more. I think we come out of it in a more whole way. So I say anyone who's anywhere along the journey.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And I've also been thinking how, we're also offering this online course on how to find an intentional community. And so people who are in that community dating process, I feel like if they were able to say, I did this whole 5-week course on how to really thrive in community, I'm not going to be someone to join your community and be total newbie and mess things up or be so disruptive. So I feel like it's a really good thing for someone to have on their resume as they're considering joining different intentional communities.
Yes, well said.
Yeah, nice. Okay, I see we have a hand up. Caitlin, I'm gonna let you speak. Go ahead and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hi. First of all, thank you so much. This sounds absolutely incredible and something that I've been looking for and definitely looking forward to. I'm curious if there's space in the class to discuss a little bit about diversity. I know that that can be kind of a hot topic in community in general. And I'm personally really interested in understanding how diversity plays into these interpersonal interactions and how we can invite more diversity, things like that.
Yeah, really good question. Thanks for asking. I mean, I think in class one, where we're talking about the cultural landscape, part of what we're going to discuss is racism, sexism, and all of the places where we are separated from each other and the immense amount of trauma that creates. Certainly advantage and disadvantage, but also for the collective, how much we have to overcome with those systemic intolerances and systemic injustices. So we're going to be starting right there in class one with that. And then, yeah, I think one of the, in class two, the joys and the sorrows, I think that's one of the places that can emerge. I mean, even when people are pretty homogeneous with regards to race or class, there's huge differences, right? We have a pretty homogeneous group at Earthhaven, and we are constantly bumping up against the places where we have a diversity of ethnic backgrounds or cultural backgrounds or values backgrounds, and all of those places are rubs. All of those places create conflict. So you know, diversity is an interesting word, and one of the things we're working on at Earthhaven, we have a racial equity task group, and one of the things that we have realized is we have to actually get our internal house in order around this stuff before we encourage. We have to create an equitable and inclusive landscape for people of different cultural, different racial backgrounds to be able to feel safe in our community. So this is a thick conversation, and we will definitely be going here. In class 4, we're talking about the toolkit, which is anti-racism, transformational and restorative justice, ecofeminism, and feminism in general. So absolutely, we're going to be touching on all of that stuff. And it's, you know, we are all, many of us are in an ongoing and unfolding learning about that. So it's complex terrain to navigate, but it wouldn't be complete if we didn't. So absolutely. Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you so much. It sounds incredible.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, good question. Okay. And I'm wondering what other questions there are out there for everyone who's joining on Zoom, or also if you're watching through the Facebook Live, feel free to drop a comment. I'm tracking that space as well. And let's see. So we do have a question in the Q&A box. I'll read this out loud. Looks like there's 2 questions. So the first one, will we go over exit strategies for community members if things aren't working out for or with them?
Oh my God, what an amazing question. I don't currently have that woven in, but I love the question so much that I wanna put that in, because I think that can fall significantly under challenges, especially in contexts where it might be hard to, you know, sell your property, for example, or yeah, like in egalitarian communities where you've spent a majority of your life in the community, but don't have a nest egg with which to leave. So yeah, let me contemplate that and see if I can weave that in some ways, because that's very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
That's such a good, I feel like people are so hungry to join a community and like get in there and you know, and of course we all hope it goes amazingly wonderfully well, but it doesn't. So
Yeah.
Okay, and then the second question here, will joys and sorrows of cohabitating with people who have chronic health conditions, neurodiversity, etc., be covered in the course? I'm particularly interested in reasonable accommodations versus when one person's needs impinge too much on others?
Y'all are an advanced question asking group. I will tell you that. Yes. We are going to be covering when we do biological landscape, and when in many places, we're going to be talking about neurodiversity and that spectrum, and also touching on mental illness and that spectrum, right? I mean, it's tricky to put ourselves or people in boxes and labels, and that's always a thing. But from living in community for 25 years, I've learned a lot about mental illness and how, and it goes back to like what floats the ship and what sinks the ship. Is the community solid enough to handle, a disruption that comes from one or more people needing a lot of extra care? And what's the balance of that? What's our net offer and our net ask in community? And it's not like we have some spreadsheet around that, but it feels like we need to be super mindful that we are not able to save everyone in the world when we're in community, because sometimes in communities, even the first number of decades, it's still fragile, it's still sprouting, it's still growing, it's still finding its legs. And so absolutely, how do we bring both inclusion and compassion and the breadth of all the human experience, and how do we also say no when it's past our edge or it's going to drain the community? I don't have specific answers to that, but that's for us to explore together. And I love that question.
Yes, those are two wonderful questions.
Yeah, really advanced stuff, y'all.
All right, another question in the Q&A box. Thank you. This sounds wonderful. I'm curious how you incorporate spirituality, not so much dogma or a specific religion, but spirituality into your teaching and community life.
Yep, another good one. I'd say in terms of the spectrum of religious/spiritual beliefs, in my community, it ranges the whole theistic range, and so it's tricky, right? So anybody's entitled, encouraged, empowered, invited to practice whatever they practice on their own. But then when it comes to collective, how do we, worship, for lack of a better word, honor, create a sense of awe, create a sense of wonder that spirituality can give us? How do we do that collectively? And in many communities that I know, including the one that I live in, we've done that through quarterly and cross-quarterly sort of land-based ceremony and rituals, right? So the solstices and the equinoxes, and then some of the other cross-quarterly holidays, we tend to do parades or games or circles, or for example, at Halloween, which land-based people often call Samhain, we do an ancestor feast. And so it's creating culture, right? It's going to be a lot in the number 4 class, creating culture, because we are not saying that everyone has to believe a specific thing, but we're creating inclusive enough ritual and ceremony so that everyone, as just a plain old human, a living, breathing, sentient creature, can participate and feel something meaningful there. So it's sort of creating our own language for the collective spirituality. And I would also add to that I think the place we live has a big component, right? Because we're all having a shared reality around stewarding this place. And whether we're growing our food there, or we're stewarding the forests, or some of the other ecosystems there, that starts to emerge from my perspective as a collective spirituality. But I'd love to explore that more with y'all. Like, what else is spiritual? What other aspects of the culture creation? Does the multi-generational component, is that spiritual for us? Is the positive death culture spiritual for us? If we're doing accountability circles around restoring or repairing, a conflict or a damage, is that spiritual? How do we define spiritual, and how do we see it woven through all these aspects of our lives?
Yes, wonderful. It reminds me of on the Earthhaven website, there's this beautiful photo of some of you around the maypole, and like the babies and the backpacks on the shoulders and everyone holding a ribbon and going. It's just so beautiful to see in that photo.
Yeah, exactly. That's an example, right, of a collective ritual that predates, modern patriarchal religions. And we can say, let's try this on. Let's play with this maypole dance and see if we feel connected to each other and can honor this season of life.
Nice, nice.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great segue. We got a question in the Facebook space about what are the communities that you are a part of or have been part of, Lee. And I'm realizing that maybe some people aren't so familiar with Earthhaven Eco Village. So maybe if you could speak to Earthhaven and other communities that you've been part of.
Yeah, great. So for more than 20 years, I've lived at a place called Earthhaven Eco Village, which is outside of Asheville, North Carolina. And it's a rural county that we live in. We have about 320 acres of land. And when we bought the land in 1994, it was completely forested. So we have had to build roads, build homes, build utilities, build all kinds of infrastructure. So we've been very preoccupied with that for most of that 25 years because we sort of carved our entire village out of the forest. And we have governance systems that are based in a consensus-like model, although we have a modified consensus format. We have social structures that have developed in part organically and informally, and in other ways more formally. We have lots of committee structures within our community that tend to things like the finances and the care of the earth and the care of the infrastructure, and the care of the people in the membership process, and the communications with the outside world. So we have about 125, 150 people living in our valley, which is a sort of geographical feature. The homeowners association, that is the actual intentional community that is Earthhaven, is some of that, but also people live nearby and participate in the life of the community who aren't actually technically residents of the homeowners association and the village. I teach classes on what I call the three-legged stool of sustainability. So through Earthhaven, talking about the physical infrastructure aspects, talking about the social aspects, and talking about the economic aspects, because these are sort of three big components that make up any community. And so that's Earthhaven. And I've also lived in several of the egalitarian communities, Twin Oaks and Acorn and East Wind. There's a whole federation of communities that are doing more of a commune style economic sharing. And because I've been in the movement for more than half my life, I'm very familiar with many other communities and have friends and beautiful colleagues around the world in community.
Great. I'm going to put the website link to Earthhaven in the chat so folks can check it out. Okay, good. Wonderful questions coming through. I wonder if there's any more questions out there. Feel free, folks, to raise your hand. We love to hear some different voices, or put them in the Q&A box, leave a comment if you're watching through Facebook Live. Yeah. Let's see. Give it a few moments here. All right. Looks like Angela has a question. So I'm going to allow you to go ahead and speak and ask your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. I was on the call yesterday, and I'm just really so thrilled with what you all are doing. And I had two questions. Yesterday, I was asking, in the general class about the difference between that and this class. And Lee, if you'd be willing to say your perspective about that difference, that would be great to hear. And then I also was curious, I so appreciate when there are ways to work with like the unconscious, or, the parts of us that are our inner worlds, our emotional, spiritual, psychological stuff that is sort of, driving most of us, but to consciously have ways to practice together where we engage those aspects of ourselves in the ways that we can transform, become more conscious, kind of play around. I myself have a lot of technology around how to do that, and but I've been doing a lot on my own and in my work with people, but not so much in community. And I'm just curious, like, are you, what you might do around that, or how you might incorporate that in your teaching. Yeah, I don't know if that's clear. I'm still articulating it for myself.
Yeah, it sounds like, well, I'm gonna go to the second one first and then go back to the first one. So I think what you're asking in the second one is the consciousness raising practices around relationship to self and others. Am I getting that right?
Yeah, and like literally ways to practice, like, how in therapy you might work with your parts or your psyche, but in community, I feel like there's ways to actually engage that material as an inquiry, as a practice, and a regular way of coming together that can be so incredible. But there aren't that many, forms that have been developed. I have a lot of information about that, I feel like, in myself. And so that's why I'm passionate to kind of explore and ask. But I'm curious, if you have ways that you come together to build those capacities and explore together and open things up in the
Yeah.
psyche.
Yes, thank you. So the first question was, can I compare what happened yesterday to this course? And I think I'm going to need Cynthia to fill me in on that because I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Yeah, it's yesterday I actually pulled up the webpage with all of our courses and talked about how they're similar or different from each other. So I could maybe start answering that, and then Lee, you can add some additional pieces.
Great.
Well, I was referring more to the actual class that we were learning about yesterday, which was the foundational class.
Yes, the starting, sure. So
Yeah.
starting an intentional community class. Yeah, they are quite distinct and different. So I can do that. So yesterday's info session on the starting intentional community with Jana Ludwig, which also starts around a similar time. That starts on June 3rd. This one starts on June 4th. But that one is really geared towards people who want to start intentional community from scratch. So it's a lot about, like, how do you bring together that initial group of people? How do you find land and the funding to build the community? How do you navigate, building a collective vision and shared culture? So there is that cultural element, whereas I feel Lee's course is really a lot more about the culture of intentional communities. And it might be, I think it has useful information for people who want to start an intentional community, and also people who want to join an existing community, or even just learn some of the wisdom from intentional communities that they can apply to their life more generally. So the starting intentional community class is going to have more of those nuts and bolts, hard skills for community builders. And then Lee's course is more, how do you navigate the landscape and the waters of intentional community culture? Lee, would you say that sounds accurate?
Yeah, yep. I think the nuts and bolts thing is like a whole different realm. I'm guessing it's going to cover legal, financial, probably some relational, but in the context of how do you get something up and off the ground. I think the tagline or the subtitle line of the Thriving of Mind, Thriving in Community is understanding, navigating, and succeeding at the social, emotional, relational aspects of life and cooperative culture. So we're really going to do a deeper dive into the self, the relationship with self, and the relationship with others.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And in terms of the consciousness raising piece, everything that it again comes back to the relationship with the self. Like, it's like holographic kaleidoscope or something. You know, I've been in community for 25 years, and the skill set that I had when I first started, or in the first decade versus the second decade versus the third decade, like, you know, I see things completely and totally differently because I've changed, right? Because my perspective, my perception of the world has changed. I've deepened, I've matured, I've integrated. And so I'm seeing things completely differently. And that's true for all of us all the time. No marriage is ever the same. No relationship with anyone is ever the same. As what is that Buddhist phrase? You can't step into the same river twice. It's never the same. So the idea that my inner work is influencing everything around me is true. It's true for all of us. So the more I raise my consciousness internally, the more everything around me changes. And to speak to your point about, are there literally practices that the collective can do to raise consciousness? Absolutely, there are. And, you know, we're finding our way. You know, we are pioneers in that realm, and there's some very cool things emerging. Process work, Arnie Mindell's work, process work, forum work, which many of us in community have been trained in, nonviolent communication work, again, gender circles, being conscious about our relationship contracts, regular talking circles, restorative justice circles, accountability processes. All of these things are ways to look at how to navigate the collective consciousness. So absolutely, we're going to be going into those, and you know, and what different communities practice, what things have been successful, what things are we still grappling with. And you know, I can't convey this enough, and one of the themes that I'll be using a lot in this course is that I often use the metaphor of a 400-year cathedral. We're at the very beginning. So Earthhaven has been around for 25 years. We're at the first 25 years of a 400-year cathedral. We have a long way to go before we're integrating systems that are sane and whole and that we can really rely on and believe in, because we're in experimental phases still.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Yes, thank you for that question. And I really like that metaphor of the 400-year cathedral. I hadn't heard that before. It's beautiful. Okay, another question in the Q&A box. What challenges tend to come up around age differences, as in seniors, the needs of young families, also singles and couples?
Oh yeah, big differences, right? One of the ways that can manifest in our community is that the folks who are not or retired or living on pensions or Social Security have more time and more leisure to be involved in the decision-making processes of the community, and young families have less so. So it can create a bit of a class difference there, or participation difference. That's definitely true. That's definitely a thing. Sometimes it can be true that implementing new policies that, you know, there's a generation gap, right? Like this whole idea of consent has been coming up a lot in our community, and also in many communities that I am familiar with, which is, what does consent look like? How do we create consent culture? How have people been not in consent when they've been navigating dating or navigating touching or navigating any of these things? And so the young people are like, hey, this is really important to us. And the older generation might say, oh, come on, that's not a thing, right? So not always. It doesn't always fall along generational lines, but sometimes when new and emergent things, even the anti-racist stuff, you know, it's harder for some of the older folks in my community to really understand what we're talking about, right? Because as we get older, we get more less flexible sometimes. Again, not always, but sometimes that's true. So lots of interesting challenges, and you know, aside from those sort of relational challenges, right, there's economic considerations and concerns. How are young families managing economically with the great demands of a young family? Great questions.
Yeah, such good questions. Okay, let's see. Let me see if there's any other questions coming through. Right, well, I'm not seeing any other questions for the moment. I've seen a lot of positive comments in the chat that this seems like it's going to be really helpful for people. Lee, as we start to wrap up here, I'm wondering if there is a piece of advice you could give to someone who is new to intentional community culture, whether or not they take this course, just something you could leave folks with, like, okay, what is like the piece of advice or wisdom I would want to offer to someone who's new to it all?
I love that question. Yeah, so I see it much like a dating process. There are phases to the dating process, and much like we can sometimes do in a dating process, whether we're dating a person or a project or a job or a friend, we can get very excited about possibilities, which means we project a whole bunch of stuff onto that person or situation. Like it's going to be this and it's going to be that and it's going to be the other. And so that is often filled with illusion, right? It may or may not be true. And so the point here is to become disillusioned, right? And I say that in a sacred way. What is the sacred disillusionment process? So information gathering can help us get sacred disillusionment. The idea that we are going to visit community and take a year or take 6 months or take 2 years to make a list of the pros and cons, to really look under the hood, to contemplate factors like geography and temperature, but also economics and infrastructure and, a spiritual focus. And of course, do I like the people, right? Because the truth is, wherever you go, there you are, that John Kabat-Zinn quote. You bring yourself with you and you're going to have challenges. The honeymoon period is going to wear off. So if you start with a sober assessment of what's in front of you, the question is, once the honeymoon period of a community wears off, are there enough yes points that is going to make you get through the hard stuff? Just like any relationship, it's nothing's perfect. Everything's going to have things that we're not going to like. So are there enough? Hell yes, I like this, that get us through into a life, right? A very complex, multidimensional and dynamic life with lots of great things and lots of hard things, just like every other life. So I think that's, make sure to extend the information gathering phase, make sure to incorporate some disillusionment into the process. That would be my advice.
Awesome. Good advice. Just realizing that some of the links I had put in earlier just went to the panelists. I'm just moving those over so that they can go to the attendees as well. There you go. Okay, let me see if we have any other questions to address right now. I guess that just on a practical note, there was a question about when this course will be offered and if it will be offered at other times. So the course that's starting up very soon will run from June 3rd to July 4th, that 5-week window. But the course will be offered one more time this year from October 7th to November 7th. So if you feel like this summertime is a little too soon, it'll also be offered in fall, and you can register for that fall time now as well. Okay. Yeah, just recognizing we have 10 more minutes left here. I'm wondering, yes, same instructor for the course in October. Lee is the instructor for this course, so it'll be more or less the same content offered. What will be different next time is those bonus sessions might be a little different, because that's part of our normal events program, bringing in outside presenters and teachers on topics that complement the course content, but that's more of the rotational piece. Okay. Lee, do you want to briefly share about how Earthhaven is structured, just really for people who haven't been there before? Is it People are asking, is there a community kitchen, separate dwellings?
Yeah, that's great. So Earthhaven is comprised of 13 different independent neighborhoods who are their own sort of community within community, and they're structured as legal cooperatives or LLCs, or in a couple of cases, incorporated as a church, 501(a) or something. And the commonly held land, so all of the land that's not in those 13 neighborhoods, is umbrellaed under a homeowners association, which we are all a part of and paid dues to, and it has a little bit of a budget, and it maintains this sort of our council hall, which is our big meeting where we have big meetings and events, and it has a big kitchen, but nobody is living there. That's our collective community space. And all of our forest and other land. But the neighborhoods are where people build their residences and have their farms, gardens, and other places where they live their lives. My neighborhood is one of those 13 neighborhoods, and it's a co-housing neighborhood, which means we built common wall buildings, sort of apartment style, where most everyone has their own kitchen. We share a collective common kitchen to come together collectively, and some of those apartments in the co-housing building share the common kitchen as their main kitchen. And then each neighborhood is structured in their own ways. There's other common wall buildings or collective living situations, and in many cases there's standalone single family homes that have all inclusive amenities. And there's many of those, and then maybe that neighborhood shares a garden space or a collective farm together. So each of those neighborhoods is designed independently with their own accounting systems, with their own workday projects, with their own decision-making style and processes. So the Eco Village is the umbrella, and those neighborhoods are independent in individual communities within the Eco Village. And then we have a larger sort of whole community culture, and we have another community association, which is not a homeowners association. We call it the Earthhaven Community Association, which manages a lot of our membership questions and a lot of our collective issues that have to do with the commons, with the whole. That's complicated. I talk about it. Actually, someone at Earthhaven is going to be teaching a sort of governance and legal structure course sometime this year, which is I think it's in September, a 2-hour course that goes through all of that, because that's infinitely fascinating, because all communities are structured slightly differently. And it's actually not how Earthhaven started out in 1994. And we realized in about 2007 that we had created this highly irregular, somewhat illegal, unsustainable governance structure. And we had to completely restructure the community, which took many, many years, almost 10 years to do. And that is the structure we now have, which is quite viable in all of the realms we need it to be viable, like state, federal, county governance systems.
Okay, great. And then a follow-up question on that. Do you all have your own means of income or any cottage industries?
Yes, we are an independent income community, and there's a membership requirement to join the community, and then there would be a neighborhood fee also when you would join a neighborhood, like to buy into a house there, or to build a house, or to buy into the infrastructure that's already created, and all of that comes from the independent members. And there are lots of cottage industries. Some have come and gone, some are there. People make a living in a variety of ways. And I would definitely refer you to my village economics class that I teach through earthhaven.org, which we spend 2 solid hours talking about the economics of the community.
Okay, awesome.
That's not the kind of stuff we're going to be covering, by the way, in this class. And I know that people are really interested in that, but it's like the breadth of information to learn about communities is pretty vast. We won't be talking about economics at all, or governance structures, or land-based systems. Those are all offered in other ways.
Okay. Yeah, it's true. It's like community touches on all aspects of human life pretty much. So it's endless content.
Yes.
Okay, and I think this might be one of our last questions through the Q&A box. Do you see single parents come into community often? Are there issues where these single parents have more needs or rely on the community more for support than a typical family?
Yep, that happens. In the early years of Earthhaven, we didn't have much infrastructure. There was less of that, but more these days, the last 10 years, lots of single parents in community. And I think that there's ways in which it's easier and harder in some contexts. I mean, I think that's true in all aspects of community. There's some ways it's easier, there's some ways it's harder. The community doesn't necessarily, there is no real the community in terms of supporting them, but there are systems in place that either individuals or groups of individuals can create to be more or less supportive of those things. It's a complex answer, and in some ways like an individual answer, but it's a good one. It's a good question.
Yeah, for sure. All righty. All right, well, I think that's pretty much a wrap. I'm going to put the link, everyone, to the course page in the chat box. And as I mentioned, you can register now for the course that starts on June 4th or register for the October course. And if you are watching via Zoom and you signed up through our website to join this event, you'll get a follow-up email that has a unique code just for you that gives you 30% off the course price. So yeah, thank you all who are joining and considering taking this course, and just thank you for being curious about intentional community and wanting to learn more about how you can really thrive in a cooperative culture, because like Lee has been saying, it is quite different than the mainstream way that we've been brought up, and I think it's part of that process of creating a more beautiful world where everyone can thrive. Yeah, so thank you, Lee, also for being here today and for offering this course. I'm really excited for it.
Yay, lovely to be with you all.
Yeah, great. Okay, folks, take care. Hope to see some of you on the course. Bye-bye.